And I'm going to share my screen, and everybody let me know if y'all can see my screen. And let me just double check. I am recording. Perfect. And yeah, everybody, can everyone see my screen? Okay, perfect. So let's start. So today there is no new content, but I'm just going to be going over, I guess, some housekeeping for the project and some of the changes we made to requirements. So today's plan thought that we should cover a few things, or we thought collectively we should cover a few things, and that we will have a lecture today. So the changes we have made in project requirements, that's the first thing we want to talk about. And then we also want to go through actually an example of parsing through and getting started on a project from an example. So I will go through an example. I made up an example of a project that's very similar to those options that were given, but different as well. And I'm going to go through how to interpret that and sort of how to get started on the project from that requirement. And then also just have an open space to discuss any questions regarding material coverage, so assignments and projects, both past and present. Okay, so let's first just take a look at the changes. So everything is the same, but the only thing that we've changed for any of these is the requirement for a login. So notice here that, for instance, this travel package booking platform, we removed the necessity of an agent versus a customer. So we don't need to worry about login endpoints or that difference. I can discuss it in the example that I bring up. I can discuss how you might do that just in case, but it's not actually required, and I wouldn't recommend worrying about it. So now, because there is only one kind of user, we also removed login. So as you can see here, where is it? Let me just, yeah, so we haven't covered user login and management. So the applications, there's very minimal user management, if any user management. But in the future, we'll be able to update that. And I can talk about that at the end of the lecture. So here, again, it's just users. There's no travel agent, no customer, right? Here, it's also users. There's no, I believe before this was customer and lister or whoever was selling things. And then here, it's just, again, users for this option, and then users for this option as well. So there's only just one kind of user. So essentially, if there's one kind of user, then we don't need to really worry about the user login or anything like that. So that's, I would say that's an improvement. So that's the change that we've made to that. So let's now actually go through an example. Why not? And so, yeah, so today we're going to go to an example. So I made up a project option, and this project is called Recipe Sharing and Cooking Platform. So this is not, you can't do this, you cannot pick this as the project 2, because I'm going to be doing it right now. But this is just an example of how to get started on your project, basically. So this example wants us to design a culinary themed application for sharing, discovering, rating, and cooking recipes. Pretty interesting. And these are some of the key features. So recipe submission. So we want users to be able to submit their own recipes, including ingredients, preparation time, cooking time, and cuisine. Recipe discovery. So users should be able to explore a library of existing recipes, filtering by cuisine, cooking difficulty, preparation time. Cooking assistant. So when a recipe is selected, users can access a detailed cooking guide, instructions, ingredient quantities, and cooking tips. And then rating and review system. So users can rate recipes they have tried on a scale of 1 to 5 stars and provide comments about their cooking experience. So reviews will be posted anonymously. So there's no user management system. So what we're going to do, okay, I'm going to take a screenshot of this and then send it in the chat because I think that just having this on the side is going to be really helpful for the rest of the lecture. Some of the activities that we have. Let me just really do that. Okay, and then I'm gonna paste this into the chat so everybody can get that there. And I also have it on the side of my screen to look at. So what are some, so there's I think this is a good kind of 4-step process we can use to, you can use this approach for your project as well. But I'm gonna go through it, this example. But basically we'll start by just asking a few questions. What sort of features are expected? Forms, inputs, content being displayed, stuff like that. So we want to be able to describe first what the user will see and how they will interact with their application. This happens before wireframing. So this is just the first thing we immediately do based on what we see in the project requirements. We can think of this like user stories, but it's a lot more informal. Just plain English, just writing out, in a document, bullet point list almost. Then we have this sort of consideration, one that's done. What sort of data do I need? How do I represent this data? So this card sort of builds up to the second part. So what is the minimum complexity I need to store data such that I can have these features? So do I need a recipe, like data object? And how can I represent a recipe? Is it an object? Is it an array? Is it a string, right? How might mock API be involved with this, right? Because we do mention mock API as a requirement. So because we're storing data in that endpoint server, that's the consideration that we have there. At this point, we might start thinking about like setting up the mock API and just thinking about, okay, now that I have my data and I know exactly what key value pairs, maybe I can use ChatGPT to just like give it the format, the structure of one data object, one recipe. And then I tell ChatGPT, okay, can you generate 20 different recipes from a bunch of cuisines and like with a sort of a lot of variability and difficulty and stuff like that, right? So that's one thing we could do. And then the third step, how would I draw a wireframe? So we draw the wireframe and then we also draw an endpoint diagram, which I think is helpful. So 2 types of diagrams. One is a wireframe of what it looks like and also user navigation and what, are we going to different pages? Is the user seeing different things based on what they click? Just how does that work in the wireframe? And then after that, of course, the endpoint diagram. So, and I'll show what that looks like, but it's similar to what we showed on Friday, where we sort of had the wireframe, or at least part of it, and then we also had like the mock API, and we were drawing arrows with like, okay, I have a post, I have a get, put, delete, where are these requests going? What are they doing with mock API? And so doing this beforehand will really help us in terms of thinking, before writing the code. And then finally, like, how would I draw a component hierarchy? So this includes thinking about how we might turn our wireframe into components. So now it's like we're thinking about the code, but we're not coding yet. How will these components fit into a parent-child sibling hierarchy? And then this includes, so now we're going to be thinking about state, props, and functions. And of course, this is all, drawn out. And once all of this is implemented or sort of drawn out, then we go into actually making like the basic structure, the CSS, the code, the state, and so on. I would actually recommend maybe first just doing the code, getting the basics working with, console logging and stuff. And then once that's done, after that point, then actually implementing things that change the database and so on. But we'll go into that process. So the first thing we're going to think about, question 1, is what HTML features, I guess, because the first question is, what sort of features are expected in terms of form, input, and content. And so now we're going to answer that first question here. What HTML elements facilitate these features? So what, and now this is where like it sort of comes in the that screenshot. So I put the 4 features here, and we're going to think like what does the user need to see or interact with to be able for that feature to be able to be possible, right? So I'll give a hint, and then this is going to be sort of collaborative because I do want to hear what you guys think. So this recipe submission, for example, right here, users can submit their own recipes, including ingredients, preparation time, cooking time, and cuisine. So when I see that, immediately I'm thinking that there needs to be a form on our webpage. Like we need to have some inputs for ingredients, preparation time, cooking time, cuisine. We need a form. Maybe cuisine, we have like a selection drop down. There's like only like 3 or 4 kinds of cuisines, maybe. So it's like very standardized. Maybe even we have something for difficulty, 1 through 5, and then the name, obviously, and then we just have like a button. So let's write that here. So we're going to write that as a bullet point list. And what we'll do, let me actually change this to size 12. Sure, let's do that. Okay, maybe a little bit smaller so we can see everything. So, you know, when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking that for this recipe submission, maybe to make it easier, we have like a button. Maybe the user has a button, add recipe. When this is clicked, the user then sees, you know, a bunch of form inputs. So name, ingredients, prep time, cooking time. Well, prep time is sort of, I guess, maybe preparation steps, like how to actually do it, and then cooking time, and then cuisine. So when they click that, they see that, and then they have submit recipe. You know, when clicked, the recipe submits, and the form is hidden again. And so this is just my thoughts. Yeah, so this is the initial brainstorming. You can change it, but the thing is it's better to change it at this point than to change it later. But you can definitely make adjustments. That's totally part of the process. Yeah. And this is just sort of a description of what does the user see, and like how do we actually enable these features. Yeah. So I'm just gonna put this in bold, form inputs, because I think form inputs, add recipe, I'll just put button, submit recipe button. So it looks like these, what I'm describing here, these are like the minimum requirements to actually get this feature to be possible. Because at the end of the day, we just need a button and we need user input, like a way for a user to put in relevant data, right? So this at a minimum is what we need to, let me actually, wish I could change the margin for this so it's more, but anyway, that's like the minimum requirement for this feature recipe submission. Does anyone have any questions about that?
I have a question. So if we have the add recipe button, if you click on that, then the form is going to open, and when you submit, the form is going to close. So we will have the same at the same place, we will have the button for add and submit.
Right. So I think what we'll do, what we might have is that we have an add button, right? And we can have conditional rendering. So we either render the add button or we render the inputs and the submit button. And so that's how we will control that. And basically, when you submit the recipe, then whatever is deciding what to render switches to the other Boolean case, and we hide the recipe submission, like the form and the submit button, and we only show the add recipe button. And that's like, there are other ways to do it that are simpler, but I thought I would do it like this just to show conditional rendering and to minimize how much stuff is on that web page screen, just to begin. But essentially it is, we either show one thing or we show another thing. And when we're done showing the other thing, then we go back to showing the first thing. Yeah. All right. So that's that. That's the example for that. Let's now think about recipe discovery. So I'm just going to read this out, and y'all can like feel free to let me know what you think about this. What sort of, what we might need to accomplish this. Users can explore a library of existing recipes, filtering by cuisine, cooking difficulty, and preparation time. Well, that's interesting. I'm just going to copy and paste this here. There we go. Yeah, recipe discovery. So what might we need to allow for this? So here's a hint. When I see that they can filter by cuisine, cooking difficulty, and preparation time, that immediately tells me that there's probably some input being taken from the user, some sort of a search input. And input and search button, absolutely, yeah. So we can, for sure, we can have an input, we can have search, drop down input for sure, yeah. So drop down, another example of input. I think what we could do, so I think what we could do though, and just a suggestion. So we could have an input with drop downs, and yes, with hover effects. But I think, what if we don't have a search button? We just make it such that as soon as a change is detected, then it automatically filters like what we see. So it's kind of like, imagine that you have, you're trying to buy something from Amazon and you have, well, I know this is a bad example, but because you need to actually click search. But what if you just have your filter, with what you want to buy, right? Like, let's say you only want to buy items that are less than like $100. As soon as you click that, then automatically you only see the items that are less than $100. So we could use a search button, but we have a search button. The only thing I'm worried about is like getting the CSS to look right, because then we hit search and then just having them all suddenly appear at the bottom. So what we could do is by default have everything a show. And then as we enter our restrictions, it filters. And then if we remove those, it goes back to all of those being there. So, okay, let's write that. So we're going to have, maybe we don't have a button. Maybe because like, I'm thinking in the beginning as well, it should just by default show, like recipe discovery should always be there by default, and probably below the option to add a recipe. So we can do that here. We can say, we could say, by default, the user sees a bunch of form inputs. So that would be, let's just say cuisine, cooking difficulty, maybe preparation time. maybe also name actually. So that's good. I think name, cuisine, cooking difficulty. So they see a bunch of form inputs, and maybe the user, upon typing into any of these, the recipe is displayed back to the user to show filter. Okay, so we have that. So that's good. I think that is, again, these are just like kind of like the basic, like what is the most basic sort of thing we need to support this functionality or this feature in terms of HTML. And okay, let's think about this. So what about rating and review system? Just based on what we have here, what do y'all think? And maybe even if we want to make this even simpler, you can even, let's say we don't need a separate, I'll give a hint that for this rating and review system, maybe, yeah, so maybe I'll give a hint and I'll say that for this, I'm thinking of the recipe as a card. And so now maybe that's a bit of a hint that when you want to review a recipe and provide comments about the experience, maybe there is something that you click on that card to, and that's like the HTML element that will let you start the review. That'll be that feature. Okay, perfect. There's stars. So stars, that is one thing. So I think to make it simpler as far as implementation goes, I won't implement stars, but that's very close. I will do a button because maybe I click review or like I just click submit review, a button on that like recipe card, and then a sort of thing pops up, a component pops up on top of everything, and there I can write like the message and the rating out of 5 and everything. Just because I'm not actually, I would need to look into how to implement that sort of the out of 5 stars thingy. I think that could definitely be done with the React though. Like you could have a component that I guess has those 5 stars, and on click it sort of colors all of the ones sort of up to that. Yeah, that could be done. For sure, that's definitely a possibility. Yeah, we can definitely do that. So let's do that. So let's say, but one thing is that we want the user to be able to provide comments about the experience. So not just a star, but we want like a rating and then also comments. So I do know I put here 1 to 5 stars. Okay. So I think what we will do is we will have comment below it for sure. So let's say a review button is available on the recipe itself that the user sees. Clicking this button provides form inputs, including stars, I guess. I just say out of 5 stars that the user can click for rating, and a text area to put in comments. Okay, perfect. So let's see. Review button form inputs and text area. So text area is like an input, but it's a larger input. So we have 3 examples there. Okay, perfect. Okay. And then now we have our cooking assistant. So when a recipe is selected, users can access a detailed cooking guide. And so what that might be actually with this here. I think the easiest way to do this would be that when a user selects a recipe, a separate area of the page is populated with information about that recipe. And so that would include stuff like right. So I think that might just be it there. So yeah, I'll just say this includes instructions, ingredient quantities, cooking tips, and then also maybe in the cooking assistant. Actually, yeah, I think this is good for now. I'm thinking that, if users can provide comments, then maybe there should be an option to see comments, on the recipe itself, right? Like any of the comments that might be associated with a recipe, we should be able to see those in some fashion. So maybe like, I remember, we would have like an icon for comments and you click the comments, but I think maybe have it in the cooking assistant. So like in this area, maybe at the bottom, include the comment section. And then, here you can also add a comment here. Actually, I think, we could change this to just have the 5 stars. So we don't even need the review button. We just have the 5 stars when we click. And then this will be where we submit comments for it. Let me know what you guys think. Is that a change we can make? I mean, it's possible to make it. It's just like if you want me to change it to that. So then when I draw it out, it'll be like that. I can't guarantee that I will implement everything, but like implement in terms of code. But what I can guarantee, hopefully, that by the end of today's lecture, we will finish drawing out all the endpoints, wireframing, and how things should interact with each other. At least that'll be done. But the code, I can't guarantee like I will get to the coding portion. Or if I do, I will finish that. Okay. So we don't need a review button anymore. So what we need is, we'd say user sees that the user can click for a rating and sees. Okay, perfect. Excellent. So on the recipe card, because I guess it's going to be a card, the user sees stars that the user can click for rating. Okay, perfect. So that's like the rating in terms of that. We made a modification here. So we have rating, and then here we have cooking assistant and review and comments. Include the comment section, can also add a comment here on the recipe. Perfect. Okay, so these are our 4 sort of things that we need. So let me take a snip of this. Because now this is our updated, right? We don't need to look at the other one. This is now our updated version. I'm going to share that in the chat so everybody has that. And now we're going to move on to question 2. So question 2 is, what data facilitates these features that we just talked about? These features that I just sent in the chat, now that we have, what sort of data will let us, even have these? So the first thing I'm thinking, just off the bat, is that we need a recipe. So we need a recipe, like just the recipe itself. Let's just do that. Okay. So we need, I'll just do it right here, recipe. Right, so yes, array of objects, but that's correct. But first, we're just going to think about what are the objects themselves. So we need a recipe. And what I'm actually going to do here, I'm going to do, I guess we need recipes, but I'll just do recipe. And then this is just an object. So yes, excellent. So we need a picture. That's true. All right, so let's do it like this. Notice how this is, I'm using the object notation. So everything here, these are key value pairs. So, which I think that's a good way to do it. So we need ID. Let's say 1. This is our first recipe. Chow mein, excellent. Chow mein's pretty good. Okay. Oh, we could actually do chow mein. All right, so let me actually, okay, I need to see the older screenshot just so I can remember. Whoops, where was it? Actually, that's okay. I have it here. Okay, so I see name. Excellent. So let's say name. That's a string, right? So chow mein. And then, why is this? Oh, okay. Let me move some of these back as we add them. We'll do that. So we have the ID, we have name. Ingredients. Okay, so ingredients, I'm thinking that is probably an array. An array of strings. So I'm just gonna say noodles and noodles, oil. Let's keep it simple. Let's just put actually just 1, but sort of you get the idea, right? Like it is an array of strings, so it's gonna look like that. Make these slightly smaller. We have the ID. The ID, when we're gonna let Mock API handle storing these, and it's always stores things with an ID. So Mock API will handle the ID for us. Perfect. So awesome. So let's see here. Preparation steps. Now, okay. Preparation steps. And so I think this, maybe just call it prep steps. I don't like, I'm using camel case. So again, an array of strings where each string is sort of the step by step. So those are the instructions exactly. Maybe actually, I think instructions, we'll call it instructions. And then, okay, so that's good. And then we'll have, so I see something here, recipe origin, people. Okay, perfect. And let's put it here that people, or let's say 3 or okay, 5. And then, so I don't want to, I need those commas there. Right, we need an image as well. Perfect. So I'll put that in there too. Cooking time, let's just say 40. So by default, this is 40 minutes. We'll sort of have that in there as a number. By default, cooking time is just, we understand that to mean minutes. And we'll make sure that when we can create the recipe, we can specify exactly these things. We'll say it's in minutes. So the user knows to put in like 40, right? Cuisine, okay, recipe origin. So by people, we mean like the number of people that this recipe is intended for. Maybe I can think of a better a better term here. Right. So for origin, we're going to use cuisine, and then we'll say I guess we could say Chinese, or we could have maybe just have East Asian, because I guess we can sort of put together Japanese, Chinese, and Korean and other recipes. We can just put them in sort of one category, and then I guess Canadian American, I'll just put North American for that. Oh yeah, rating. Okay, so for rating, an array is probably not. I'm just going to mention that cook time, rest time, total time. Okay. I'll just say total time, just to make it simple. I'll just say time, although we do have this here. Okay. So one thing here, rating, we're going to think of an array. No, sorry, not an array. Hmm. Actually, yeah, this is a good point because we have multiple people who have submitted ratings, right? Okay. What we can do is we can sort of have this as hidden, but because we want to display one rating to the user, we don't want to display like hundreds, depending on how many people have submitted ratings, right? What we could do is we could have one rating, and then we could have number of ratings. Like, let's say this is 300. So the idea is that 300 people collect, like the average of 300 ratings is 4. And so I guess I don't think that our math would be right. Okay, well, we might need to actually, I agree, we might just need to make this an array. 4, 3, 4, dot, 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 like that. And so what that means is that we're going to have an array of like, yeah, we can, yes, definitely, we can do that. So if we have an object inside the rating, so we have overall rating and then an array of individual, that will work. Every time someone submits a rating, it updates the array and it recalculates the overall rating. I think that I like that better because then we don't need to like recalculate the average every time we display a recipe. Yeah, I agree. And I think this is good because it'll be a little bit more complex in terms of the object we're using. Okay. So this is overall for, oops. And then this is, I just get ratings. And then 3, 4, 5, 5, 3, dot, dot, dot. Right. And then, okay, for sure. So calories per serving. So let's do that. Maybe just calories. And by default, we'll, wait, is this size 14? Okay. Calories per serving. I feel like chow mein's kind of a heavy dish. So maybe let's just say 600 calories per serving. And then this is just, we don't need to mention it, but we'll know that it is per serving. And maybe when we want the user to give that information, they can provide that. Okay, so that's good. Let's make these in bold. Bold, bold, bold. These are our key value pairs. So when a user submits like the rating, what they're actually doing is submitting something that goes into this array. It's like a put request. And then, one more thing. I would say that the instructions that we show in the cooking assistant could be these instructions that are in this array. And so I guess the instructions are not something we show to the user unless they click that. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. There's one more thing we need, which is the image. And I think the easiest thing to do for this image is just to have it be a URL to a web page. So https:// ... It's just a string that is a URL to a web page where our image is hosted. Okay, so
Does
does
that
anyone have?
function, does that functionality also have adding a new recipe?
Yes. So
So in
we
that case, will we upload the image, or again we'll give a link to the image?
That's a good point. I think it might be better to provide, well, here's the thing. If we provide, it might be better for us just to only allow links, because if we want to deploy this and we want people on their own computer to run this, I don't know, if we have upload, we would then need to take that image and store it on our server some way. And that would be a bit more complicated, storing image data on our server and then getting that image data back to, be displayed. I don't know. I remember I tried this with another student, and the mock API, like their mock API server, there's a limit to how large the image could be, and it was not letting like us store that content. So then we had to think about compression, which would, it got this is why in the future, it's when we have our own database, we don't need to worry about that, because then our database is just going to do what the mock API does. It's exactly the same thing. You guys, so databases, you guys will be totally fine with it because you've been working with databases this whole time. You've been working with mock API, which is like kind of like a pseudo database. What about the user hub? Okay, so so I see Gurfran, that's a great question. So we modified the project requirements, so we're not actually going to keep track of the user for now. So we won't have any information about the user who posted this in this example, nor in the project. So the reason why is because, and let me just double check here. Yeah, so we just say users can do this, but there's no mention of keeping track of who's who. And we do mention it here. We haven't covered secure user login and management, so then we'll have very minimal, if any, user management. But in future, we will have that. Now, how that would be done is a bit more complicated. So you would probably have some login. You put your username and your password. Yeah, there's no need to work on login. Okay, so we have this here. Absolutely, yeah. So I think the free version of mock API can only have one project and 2 endpoints. So that's why we wanted to make these changes so that at maximum, you'd only need 2 endpoints. So the free version would suffice, yeah. That is our recipe object. And I think, honestly, we'll only need 1 endpoint for this. I think we'll only need the recipe endpoint, because it looks to me like, according to our requirements, this recipe object kind of has everything that we need. Yeah. So, yeah, we will use a /recipes endpoint here. It's a bit larger. And, oh, I like that color. Okay. So actually, yeah. And then here, I'm just going to write a little bit of text about this. I'm just going to say that, this recipe or this endpoint stores, I guess, an array of, okay, it stores our recipe objects. So plural, so as an array or JSON. Let's just say as a JSON. So JSON, it's going to store a bunch of them, one after another. So all the recipes will be there. Okay. So now let's go through, actually, let's take like a 5-minute break. And then when we get back, I will just show, I'll open a mock API and I will just tell them that like, this is 1, can you generate like 20 for me? And we'll see what ChatGPT can do for us. So let's take 5 minutes and then we'll come back. And then when we come back, we're going to do the wireframe. So, and then we'll have the wireframe, and then we're going to work on the endpoints. So we're going to be building out, I guess, the part of the wireframe that interacts with the endpoints, and then showing what requests we need to do. And then we'll just be sort of doing a component hierarchy that sets us up. All right, so let's just take 5 minutes, and then we'll come back. All right, so we are back, and oops, let's go through this thing. So I just opened up ChatGPT here. This is my ChatGPT, and I'm gonna give it this. Just I'm gonna say okay. I'm going to the structure of a recipe object. I want you to generate, a JSON with 20 recipe objects. Please use your own, I guess, of these to fill in the necessary data, but keep it simple. For instance, I don't want, for instance, I don't want more than 10 ratings each, but also ratings for each, but also, and then I'll say overall rating is an average of the ratings. And also, please preserve the data type. So I think ChatGPT is pretty smart. I think it can do this easily for me. Oh, wow. Okay, these are example.com, so we'll need to find where these come from. But for now, I'll just put these in there. It's taking some time. East Asian, Italian. Okay, we might need to change these. Let's stop generating. Can you redo this, but for 10 recipes maximum? Also, these are the cuisine categories. So I will say East Asian, South Asian, Middle Eastern, European. Okay, let's just keep it for those. So while that is cracking away, while ChatGPT is computing our database for us, let's think about wireframing. So, with these features, so I can share this in the chat again. Let's think about how we might make the wireframe. And again, the wireframe is going to be really, really simple. We don't need to go too complex. So I think we mentioned that so this is going to be our starting point. Okay, I guess that's fine. Maybe think of a lighter background. Sure, that's fine. Okay, maybe that. So that's just, default background. There we go. Okay, so that's just our page itself. And so, okay. We could make it really, really simple. We could have, just trying to think here. So what if So great question. For now, we're just going to be using mock API, but in future, we will be covering, we will need to confirm if we're covering SQL databases, but in future, we'll be using databases. So we may go over having to do tables, and there are certain commands you can use to create these tables. I think, yeah, we will get back to you on that, but we will be creating our own databases in the future and sort of doing it that way without using mock API. And so that gives us more control over what we want. But, it's interesting because like I think that most of the things we could do with a database, we could do with mock API, but just mock API will require a bit more work to do it. But I'm sure it can actually be done. Because again, we removed the login for as a requirement, but I was actually working on setting up login, and I was surprised that mock API could be used for that. So what should we do if we use both endpoints of our mock API in the API assignment? That is an excellent point. That's an excellent point. Right. So what you could do, I will actually get, yeah, you could create a new email, but that might be a lot of like work. I mean, you could create just a new email just for the purpose of getting the mock API account. But I'm thinking like, yeah, I guess the assignment was submitted with a with that. You know what? Let me test one thing. Let me actually test one thing. I'm pretty sure that you can actually, I do think the free version, you can have multiple projects. So this is, right now, this is a free version on this account. Oh, yikes. Okay, I can only have one project for the, okay, there's a paid version. Okay. Let me actually confirm, but I think that you could probably submit, yeah, we'll get back to you on that. I'm just thinking that if it's possible that we can just get you to submit like screenshots of the mock API for that assignment, and then the endpoints and the data inside, and then just like just so we know it's working. Yeah, and then you can delete it. But don't do that now. I will confirm if that's allowed. But yeah. And I guess the thing is, by the time that we get your grading back for the API assignment, like through the live link, we'll have already used it. So we'll confirm, we can also like confirm with you at that point, then okay, we have given you our grade. We don't need to test anymore. So then you can remove those endpoints. Yeah. But I will, that's a great question. I will confirm that. Yeah. And then, although if you want to get started ahead of time before grading, you can, again, yeah, create a new email. I think there is, let me search this up, temporary email. Oh no, but this is only after 10 minutes. So this is not good. Well, can this be changed to, yeah, this is only 10 minutes, so I wouldn't suggest using this. But yeah, temporary email, it's a bit longer. Okay, so where were we? Okay, we were on wireframing. So I was thinking like maybe, maybe the left-hand side of the screen is for the recipes, and then make the right-hand side show these steps. That's a possibility. We could also just have all of it be on one side, but I think that would be good. So yeah, so let's divide this in half. Let me I'll just use a line here. I'm going to be copying the same thing. Okay, so we have this. Let's group this as it is. Let's make it a little bit larger. And so that is grouped. So this is going to be our basic web page. What's on the left-hand side at this point in time? Maybe an image, or a design, or something like that. Sorry, on the right-hand side. On the left-hand side, we're going to have our forms. So let's do that. So let's make, these are our, this is the recipe submission. I'll just say RS for recipe submission. Make that a little bit smaller. And sure, let's do that. So this is, oops, not like this. Okay. This is our recipe submission. So that, when I say RS, that is all the logic to handle this. So it's either an add button or it's a forms with a submit button. So there's conditional rendering for one or the other, okay? So that's good. Now we have recipe discovery. And so I think that recipe discovery can just be the rest of it. I'm just going to say RD. And actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this to the top. I'm going to put one recipe in here, a recipe card. I'm just going to call this R for recipe. Like that. This is one recipe. Super basic wireframe, but just to get the idea across, okay? Now, right, cooking assistant comments. So, okay, this is, so we're going to do it like this. We're going to group this, and then I'm going to say here, copy, is that there? Okay, let's make an arrow. So, do that, size 2, make this white. Okay, so here, I add text. Okay, let's make this blue so it pops out a little bit more, maybe a darker blue. Okay, purple, and we'll say here, user clicks recipe card, or just recipe, okay? This is what we kind of mean by wireframe. Like, yes, we have, we show what it is, but then also we want to show what does interaction do? It's a good habit to get into to show that. Okay, so what we can do here, we can say that, so here, user clicks the recipe. When user clicks recipe, then we go to this display. And it's the same display. There's no like there's no router. Okay, so this example, I'm not using router. And actually router is not necessary. There could be a case in your project where router might be required, but it might not be necessary. It really just depends. Let me actually double check here. Yeah, I don't see anything detailed information. I don't see anything here, just what I was looking, where a router would be absolutely required to handle multiple pages. But it's a possibility. This example, there is no router, the one that I'm showing. Okay, so when we click this recipe, we want to actually show the information here. So maybe let's now do that. So now here we're showing here. I'm going to just say CA. I'm going to type in CA for cooking assistant. Okay. Does anyone have any questions about this, like what I'm doing here? Group that. Anyone have any questions, or is this clear? This sort of wireframe is pretty straightforward. That when you click recipe, you click that recipe card, now the cooking assistant sort of display shows up where, you know, we can select recipes, we can do all those things. Okay, perfect. Now, one more thing in terms of sort of, I want to look at this in more detail, this RS. So what I'm going to do is, okay, maybe I'm just going to copy that. Okay, so let's look at this RS in more detail. I think we might as well just draw this. So we're going to conditionally render. There's two cases based on this. So let's just do elbow connector here. Let's just go down here. Full size 2. Okay, and then here, just make another arrow. Yeah, I can't. There. Okay. So the reason why I'm putting this here is I want to there's some conditional rendering here. So I'm just going to put that here. So we're going to start by default. This RS by default is going to say add recipe. when user clicks add, then we have recipe submission. Now it's not absolutely necessary, but this sort of thing is easier just to see. So you can see here, user clicks add, and when the user clicks add, we go from having add a recipe button to having the recipe submission component, which is going to be like, well, we don't need to think about components yet, but it'll have the forms, it'll have the submit button. And then when the user clicks to submit, we'll go back to sort of that, right? There, and there. And here, user clicks submit. So there's some, this gives us a hint about the state. Sort of gives us a hint about that. But we'll go more into that later. Does anyone have any questions so far, or is this good? This is basically going to be our wireframe for this project. And if no one has any questions, just feel free to type in no. And okay, awesome. So the reason why I did the wireframe like this was just because it'll make planning out the endpoints be easier. Okay, so I'm just going to put this on the side so I can see. Okay, so we have this here. Okay, what about endpoints? Great question. Okay, so let's, I think if I copy this, I will see. Okay, perfect. So we have this. We need to split this in half because we actually have two cases. Because the thing is, we have different endpoints available depending on whether okay. Because this is an endpoint. When you click a recipe, to get this to display, that's like it. Well, we don't actually need an endpoint for that. We can have all that information be displayed locally. So that's fine, actually. Endpoints we do have are when this is available, this cooking assistant, the ability to write comments, and then on the recipe card itself, when we click a rating to do that, and then also submitting a recipe. So actually, I think the easiest way to go about this, let's first talk about this. So, and then, okay, you know what? I'm just going to copy these and paste them here. And I think I can do that here. So if that's okay, there. I just wish I could make this a bit larger. I can actually minimize this. That is awesome. Minimize that a little bit more. Might be a little bit, get this a little bit there, move this a bit down. So purple is like, what's in purple is not endpoints. I'm going to add endpoints. Hope everybody can see that still. So this is like what we have right now, but now let's think about the endpoint, right? So let's make a cylinder for our mock API. And remember, we have one endpoint. So we'll just put it down here and make this a nice color, like sort of maybe go for a nice light blue, darker. Okay. Perfect. So now we're going to have one endpoint. So we're going to put this recipes endpoint, and we know what that stores, right? So let's just put that there. Okay. So let's think about this. What how are we interacting with this mock API? So we know that when we click a recipe submission, we know that we want to make a, so what type of request actually? What type of request are we making here? Let's make this. What type of request is this? When we click recipe submission and we submit a recipe to our mock API. Perfect. So I'm going to put post. And something else I'm going to do, so I'm not going to show the arrow going back with the response, but it's understood that that is like, that there is a response going back. I'm not going to actually show that unless if it's absolutely required. Now we'll just do this. Just put post and great. Let me just center this, decrease the size of this a little bit more. Okay, copy that so we can repeat that process. Okay, so you click add, you see the submission. Okay, you actually submit the recipe. That's a post request that updates it. Perfect. Okay. What about, ooh, okay, this is going to be a good one. What about, you could either do it here. Okay, so we're gonna make this an elbow connector. So I can like show it. Do that there. I don't know, like, okay. What about this request? When you click a rating, actually do that to there because these are both considered the same request. What about rating a recipe? What type of request is that? So I see some examples. So I'll say one of the answers is correct. And I'll give a hint. Rating a recipe is not a post request. Yeah, so it's put. Now, it could be post, but post is usually for creating new data. Put is going to update an existing object. And we are really just updating the existing one. We're adding a new recipe, and then we're also going to recalculate the what the overall should be based on a new sort of calculation of the average. So we'll just update that. Perfect. Okay. So let's put a put. That's an example for the puns please project. Put a put request here. Perfect. So that's put. Okay. Are there any other requests that we need? I'm just looking here. This is not a trick question. I'm just I might have forgotten if there's anything else that we need. I think that might be it. We don't have an option to delete recipes. Yeah, we for sure. Let's do delete. So let's also just put from here. I need to like move that down there. Move this here. Okay. It's not fun. All right, well, you guys get the picture, right? So it's just do that. It's just a, can I multi-select these and do that? Okay, good. Yeah, I'm just putting, this is gonna be a delete. Let's say there's an option to delete it. Now, here's the thing. So normally, you obviously only ideally want people to be able to delete their own recipes. But let's just say that we don't need to worry about that for now, okay? Yes. Okay, perfect. Get for searching. Yeah. Excellent. So here, this recipe, was RD discovery? So in that recipe discovery, that is like a search, availability. That's a search, exactly. So that is a get. Now, here's the thing though. What if when we first load our web page, so we do need a get, but I think that just the page itself, there's sort of a get request, because we could have a use effect and we could say on the initial load, do a get. And so whenever we search, we're just filtering on whatever is available. And every time we do an action, like deleting or adding, we're just redoing that get functionality. Okay, so that's what we have so far. Does anyone have any questions about this? No? Okay, perfect. I'm going to try to hopefully set up the code with the time available. I don't think I can get functionality working, but I can get a good skeleton. This is what we call skeleton code. So use effect is actually not a get request. It's not any specific request. What use effect is just saying that we want to, we can, if we use those square brackets, we can say on the initial render, on the first render, do this before it's done rendering. And so in this context, I can make sure that a get request is sent on the initial render and the data, the recipes are populated, the local state that represents our recipes. Yeah. It could be anything. It could be a post request. It could be delete. Delete would make less sense, but it could be a post request. You could just have on the initial load, just create a recipe and send it to the mock API. Okay, so component hierarchy that sets us up for coding. Okay, let's worry about that now. So I remember, if you guys remember this, we're going to do the same thing we did here. Remember this puns please, where we had state props functions, and then we sort of talked about what is happening in that context. So let's do that. And so what we're going to have, we're going to actually just have this. So I'm gonna share this in the chat so we can actually look at, what do we need in terms of components. I will have this available on the side. Okay, let's first get this set up. So we have, oops. Uh-oh, why is this so large? This is just like color coding. I don't know why that is this like that. I've selected middle. Okay, well, whatever that is. Oh, there we go. Okay. This is just color coding. So just so things are more straightforward, let me just double check. Sure, let's make that for now. Kind of bright colors. But these are the three sort of things we're going to think about. And then let's now think about the actual component structure. So when I'm looking at this, we sort of have a okay, it's difficult to know whether these are parents or children. So I guess we just start with our we'll start with our general, like the app itself. So we'll do that here. And then that is, let's just call that, what's a good name for this project? Recipes. Well, here, I'm sure there was a name given here. Recipe sharing and cooking platform. Well, someone can think of a name. Until then, I'm going to call it app. but feel free to share an interesting name in the chat and we can use that. So that's like our default starting point. Within that, I'm just looking at this like RS, RD. So I think that's perfect. We can have a recipe submission component. Keep it simple, you know, it's just the name itself. We have a recipe submission component. Make this a little bit smaller. Smaller. We have that. We have I'm just looking at the wireframe. We have the recipe discovery. I just call it discovery and submission. Or submit. The submit component, the discovery component, where we see our, you know, we see that search option, the search and so on. So that's good. And I'm thinking that the, like, let's just, there, okay. And I'm thinking that like, that cooking assist is a sibling because it's to the left of these, right? And it's not always going to be there. It's only going to be there when you click on a recipe, then it's enabled, and then it gets that, you know, the data that is being, the recipe that's being clicked on. But by default, there's no recipe being clicked. So we can have it that like nothing is actually being rendered by default. By default, we just have nothing there. But I guess by default, you know, in the CSS, so in the CSS for this, we could just say that these guys only take up 50% of the available parents container. And that's how we can control that. And then we can have by default, when there's nothing here, when there's nothing rendered here, like when nothing is clicked, just by default, we can have whatever is here just be a background image, the design or whatever that might be. That's totally possible. So I just thought I'd mention that. So I'm just going to call it cook assist. And then here, let's, I'm going to take this discovery and I'm going to put recipe, like the singular recipe, because the discovery is going to be, the discovery component is going to have like, let's see here. Let's clarify this. So the discovery component, oops, is going to have form inputs for search. Okay, so we have the ability to search for recipes and then we have the display. So we could make those separate, you know, we could have, and let's actually do that. I think that would be better. So we'll have like the display, the recipe display itself. So maybe just display, one display, which has recipe, ... And then we have the another component at this level, oops, which is going to be, let me just move these there. And at this level, it's just going to be the maybe search. We'll just call it search. Call it its function. Okay. How's that? Does anyone have any questions about that? Or is that pretty straightforward? I'm just looking at the thing that I shared in the chat. I'm just looking at the wireframe and sort of thinking, what's an easy way we can sort of divide this up in terms of thinking about, you know, what can go, what are the components we want, and just components, not thinking about any state yet. And remember, these are multiple recipes. So recipe, and then I'll just put Actually, I should put ... here. Multiple recipes. Okay, perfect. No state, no props, no functions, at least not yet. Okay, but we are going to be thinking about that. So I'm going to move this here. We are going to start. Okay. I'm going to move all these here. I'm actually going to group these. This is, again, this approach that I'm doing, I highly recommend doing this for your project because it'll make everything a lot easier. You know, you can follow these very similar steps. And you can obviously do your own sort of thing with it as well. But this is just how I would go about thinking about the project. Okay, perfect. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just think about functions. What functions do we need that allow all of our features to work? Okay, and this is sort of like a summary. It's almost like a summary of everything that we've done so far, because now we're just thinking about what functions let us do what we want to do. Okay, so I'm going to use size 12, and I'm going to name these functions. Like, so for first function, I'll give a hint. I'll say the first function is going to be, we don't even need to give it names. We can just say function 1, right? So function 1, what function 1 is going to do is very abstractly, we want a function that handles submitting a recipe to mock API. Okay, so that's one function. What is another function that we want? I'll just call it function 2. Feel free to type in the chat. Searching a recipe, for sure. Yep. We want another function handles searching, or I guess say filtering our recipes. Right. We'll talk more about like how those do that. Submitting a review, okay, function 3. So we want handles submitting a review. So we have two kinds of reviews. Remember, we have we have rating and we have comments. Submitting a rating to mock API. We have function 4, excellent, handles submitting a comment to mock API. Actually, I think I'm missing something, everybody. I think I'm missing something. Something very important I missed. I don't think I had comments here. So thanks for reminding me, because when I saw that, I'm like, okay, we do need comments. Hi. There we go. Now I'll need to update ChatGPT. I need to tell ChatGPT that we actually need comments for that now. But that's good. So we know that. Okay, so we have 4 functions so far. We actually need a few more. We need to handle submitting a recipe to mock API. So when you click the submit button, excellent. Searching or filtering recipes. So yeah, so saving recipes, that's what it means to submit the recipe. We're saving it. Searching or filtering, you can imagine that we need a function so that whatever the user is typing on this search or whatever they are modifying, that filters what's visible. Yes, excellent. Okay, so we need a function to get recipes from mock API and update local state. So that's actually, this is quite important here. This function, because this function is going to be called many times. That's why I put it in bold there. Yes, we do have deletion. Excellent. So handles deleting a recipe from mock API. Okay. Is there anything else we need? So we have a function for, what about like, let me give a hint. Remember on change? Every time a user types or does something, we want to modify we want to get something from our inputs and modify something in state. So we need functions to handle that. So we need a function. I'm going to put function 7. We need a function to handle keeping track of the recipe the user is adding. We need another function handle keeping track of the comment the user is typing. And I think that might be it. Do correct me if I'm. Let me make this slightly smaller. Ooh, okay, that's size 9 is fine. So we have those. Get recipe, yep. We have this one, function 5. So I'll give better names when I implement it if we get to that. But actually, I don't think I will implement it. But I would say that when you do implement it, so I'll give some recommendations for how to get that started. But yeah, so these are our functions. Oh, here's one thing. So here's a hint. So if you have an action, let's say, this will just come in handy in future when it comes to actually naming things. I think that if you have a function, let's say this is just sort of unrelated, but let's say you have a form right here. This is totally unrelated, but this is just a naming convention I would recommend that everybody use. Up to you though. So if you have a form and maybe the form you have a on click something that happens, right? So here I would say here handle form click. That would be the function I would define in the parent. Okay, I would something like that. And then the prop that I would create would be on form click. That would be this one. And I'm actually getting this from, we'll actually share this in the chat. I think this will be really helpful. React naming conventions. I'm just going to share this in the chat here. So when you actually do implement it, I think that will come in quite handy. But I just thought I'd share that. Okay, but I'm just going to delete that for now. That's in there. That's sort of separate. Edit recipe title. You want to add edit recipe? Yeah. So I think what we can do, yeah, editing recipes. That's a good point. I think for now, let's not have that functionality. But in future, yeah, we can definitely add that in. That is actually, that is something that you do need in your project though, like the ability to edit. And it won't be that different from what we have. It'll just be like maybe an edit button, you click that, and then you could make it in what we have. You could click on edit click, maybe it opens the editing form here, or maybe it reopens this RS, this recipe submission thing. Specifically with, instead of, it could reopen this with the same thing here, but we send a put request instead. Yeah. So that's one way you can implement editing. Yes, let's avoid sharing of recipes for now. I guess because that is another feature that we will have to, some things will need to be changed, and there are some time constraints, so we can do that. Okay, so we have this so far. Okay, let's start thinking about sort of states and what that's going to look like. Okay, so here I'm going to have, I need to make this quite small. And then here. Okay, so in terms of state, there's a few examples of state that we need. So in the app itself, we need our recipes. So the recipes that we have, those are like the ones we're displaying. We need recipe, which is, so recipe is actually what the user is recipe is what the user is typing. Okay. This is what I'm highlighting, recipe singular, is what is being updated on change as the user types in their recipe. So that is something that we need at that point. Now, actually, let me think. Could we have this state be stored in the submit component and not up here? Okay, so do you guys, so that this idea, so far in our state, we have recipes, plural, which keeps track of all the recipes that we're displaying to the user, right? And then we have a singular recipe, which is going to keep track of what the recipe the user is typing in, right? And when they click submit, we then send that recipe out, with the mock API. But here's the thing, do we need this recipe component, this recipe state, the singular state, do we need that in app, or can we just put that in the submit component here? Because I'm thinking the only place where we need this singular recipe is really just in the submit component. So it's where we have the function. So that actually, we have our functions that are in sync with the input, like on change, right? Exactly, right? So let's remove that there. And let's move this here. We have singular recipe here in this component. And again, because this recipe in the submit, that is what is sort of in sync with function 7. So these two are in sync. The state recipe in the submit component, because submit is where we have like the input fields to handle what we're typing. So we only need that state there. And then we need function 7, which is going to be handles keeping track of recipe the user is adding exactly. Now, technically we need function 1, but remember like what we did with remember the pun services where we sort of took those functions out so we can just import them? Now, for now, I will just put that, but we should keep that in mind because we can reduce the number of props that we send. So for now, I will put function 1 is required, and I'll just say here that function 1, I'm just going to do this in red, and I would recommend doing this as well. Function 1 is a prop that is sent down, okay? You know what? Let's make another one here. Let's just call this services. And let's color code this as purple. And that is going to be a service function. And I actually think that I'm gonna do it like this. Function 1, function 3, function 6. Actually, you know what? No, my bad. They're not service functions. Sorry, let me just think for a moment. Yeah, this is something we need to pass down from the parent. Now, the reason why we need that is actually because function 1 is not just like, yes, we will have a function in our services that actually sends the request, but we want to update, we want to like, in the .then, we resync our data locally, right? We send another GET request. We can't do that if it's not being passed down, because actually, when you submit the recipe here, right, when you on submit, you need to run this function. And this function, because it's accessing state in the parent, it actually needs to be passed down as a prop. So that's why we need that there. Let me actually move this back up here. Make this function 1. So function 1 will exist up in the parent, basically. Okay, so we have recipes, we have function 1. Does anyone, I can clarify that. Does anyone have any questions about that? Like why I put function 1 up here instead of just having it down here? Actually, we'll remove services for now. So I will just mention that the reason why I put this up here is because, yes, we submit a recipe to Mock API, but once we do that submission, we want to then again get the recipes, right? So because whatever function 5 is, we're sort of running that after every time we do a rating, we submit a recipe, maybe even submitting a comment. We want it to show immediately. So that's why we actually have these functions in our parent up here. So function 1 is in the parent. Function, I don't think function 2 needs to be in the parent. Yeah, that's fine. Function 1, okay, so I think function 4, function 3, and function 4 need to be in the parent. And function 6. So the reason why I'm putting all these functions in the parent is because each of these functions are interacting with Mock API in some way. They're updating something about our recipes. And as soon as we update them, we need to do another GET request when they're done and update local state. And we only have access to that, or I guess the best way, we only have access to setting that in the app itself. Or I guess in the simplest way, we only have access to that in the parent component itself, which is app. We have access to recipes, right? Okay. So does anyone have any questions about that? Why these are in the app component? And if not, like you can type in no, so I know. It's another pun. Okay, perfect. All right. So just clarifying the submit component here. Submit is handling us submitting a recipe. So that's why we need to keep track of this recipe singular, which is just going to be, it can be an object that just represents what we are typing in to our inputs, and that's on change. And that on change is actually function 7. It's just local. Now it's not coming from on high like the parent here. The red function, this red function, function 1, is coming from above, right? Because what we'll do is we'll be like, okay, and then on click, run function 1 and pass in as an argument the event and the recipe that we are creating here, or we're now done creating, and then set the recipe to a blank, right? So that's how we'll do that. Okay, perfect. Now let's think about this discovery component. So I'm thinking, this discovery, maybe this is where we have the search field. So this is where we keep track of what the user is basically typing, which is whatever they're typing is updating, is going to be updating what they see. So let's think of here. What functions do we need to pass down, if any? I think that we may not need to pass down anything. We might just need function 2, and that can be local. And the reason why it's like that is actually, so we do need search. Okay, we do need in the display, right? So that's why we do need to pass that down as a prop. But did I just okay, can everyone still hear me? It says my internet connection is unstable. Okay, good. All right, so I was just discussing this discovery component, and discovery is like we want to be able to search what the user, like we want to be able to search to filter what recipes are shown to us, and we also just want to see the recipes, right? So there's a few things we'll need to pass down into this discovery component. So we need to pass down the recipe itself themselves as well as search. And so, you know, automatically I can think of this. So I'll talk a little bit about filter, how it's working. We're passing down these recipes, and so I'll just put this function 2, which is actually updating it's going to be updating the search state, and it's only going to exist here. And the thing is that the recipes that we pass into this display are like, they're not all the recipes, they're just the recipes that sort of are from filter. So we could make a function. We could, so I'm just gonna do this here. I'm just gonna call it function X, but I don't want this to be too confusing. I'm just calling it function X. And what function X is gonna do is it's gonna take recipes and search, and it's just gonna return the recipes that do not, sorry, it's gonna return the recipes that like, that match the search criteria, okay? And the reason why I have that here is because I want to pass down into display. I only want to pass down, so here, when, you know, instead of putting, when you say like the recipes, when you're passing down the prop, I want to do something like recipes that pass filter. I don't need the search. So that's what I'm passing down into the display. Okay. So I use function X. And actually, what this would look like, I'm going to do this here. What this would look like if the prop is named recipes, it would just be something like this: function X recipes search. So we could have that, and then we can just map, you know, then the display just needs to map. So I'm wondering, does anyone have any questions about this? This just came to mind to simplify not needing to send down any more props here. Just we're basically sending down the recipes, but we're only sending down the ones that pass our filter. So we have some custom function here, function X, that handles that. And yeah, if anyone has any questions about that, I can re-explain that. But I could also change this so that we pass down pass down the search as well, and then we just do the filtering here. And you know what, actually, I think that let's just go with that. I think that is more straightforward. So we will pass down recipes and search again down here. So I would say that this planning should happen before coding. All of this planning should happen before coding, because it's harder to, I mean, it depends. I would say for myself and for most people, it's probably, without a plan, it's harder to code, honestly. Like, because if I'm trying to code something, I always have like pen, paper with me to plan out what I want to do and so on. Like, it's more difficult for me to code from scratch, because then I have to do all of this thinking. I'm just doing it like mentally without writing anything down, and it takes longer. So this it might seem like it takes more time, but it actually implementing sort of this sort of idea before you start, it makes it easier. Now, also, I should clarify, when I say implementing, I mean for your own project, doing this approach. You don't need to implement what I've done here. I'm not even implementing what I've done here. I don't think there's time for that, like code-wise. But this idea, this sort of stepwise doing this, and then, you know, having this, you can even do it on like a Google Slides, just like I did. It will be, I would say it will be quite helpful before doing the code. So I just adjusted this slightly. Yeah, no function X. All right, no function X. Let's remove that. We have recipes and search. So search is a state that exists only in the discovery. And then I'm passing down recipes and search to display. And then in display, I have a filter, which filters based on the search term, this search, and then maps the recipes that I want to show. So it only shows the recipes I want. It filters out the recipes that do not match the criteria. And I think in the notes app, we went over sort of more examples, but actually, let me do this. So I'm going to post these slides. I'm actually going to share like fun. There is a really good video playlist. Okay, this playlist, this guy, functional programming. So these first two parts are really good. So I'm going to put that here. I'm going to add a link so that I think when I submit this, you should be able to click that. Yeah, so this guy has some really good videos. The first two videos, I'm just recommending that there. One more thing I want to do before we get to, before we finish this sort of thinking, these React docs here, I'm going to share, I think that this bit on managing state is extremely helpful. I would highly recommend reading this before you start thinking about, like, before you get to this point. I would highly recommend reading these. So I'm just going to, I think just 1, 2, 3, just these first 3. Okay. So I'm going to put here, I'm going to put state, I'm going to say here, first 3 articles, or first 3, I'll just say, what are these? 1, 2, yeah, the first 3 in managing state. Highly recommend reading those. I'm actually going to put them as a link here, so it will be available there. Very useful reading, and that helps in thinking about state. And then here in the search, in those callback functions, I do believe he covers filter, that YouTuber, and filter is how we're accomplishing displaying these. We have filter, and then we have a map on what the filter returns, okay? Because the filter returns an array that matches our criteria, and then we map onto that. And then when we map onto that, then it's like, okay, now we're passing a recipe, we're passing an individual recipe, down to the child component, which is recipe. So each recipe, plural, gets its own recipe. And then that's actually, we can then sort of navigate through that object using our, notation, or proper dot notation or square notation to get the data we want to display in this component, okay? That's that. So we have function 1, 7, function 2 is here. I think function 2 is searching or filtering, okay? And is there anything else that we need to keep track of? Right, so we need to handle function 2. We also have function 6, function and function, so function 2, function 3, and function 6. These are both as, right, because remember, these two functions, so the functions handling submitting a rating and also deleting, these are in the recipe themselves, okay? So let me actually copy that, paste that down here. And this is also going to be, it's passed down to each recipe because, you know, we'll have the buttons like in the recipe themselves, and it's just going to be doing what we define up here, right? Okay. Anything else that we need? So, remember, I'm just going to put this in bold, function 5, because function 5 is quite important. It's being called after a lot of things. Deleting, submitting a rating, track of, okay, so that was here. Submitting a recipe to, okay, so that was also here. That's the submission. Right, search. Okay, so here, the actual search is probably going to be called on change. So here I'm going to do this. And what we will do is, like, this search is basically being updated. So that search, that's what is being up, it's passed down to, oops. It's passed down as a prop to the search component. So the search component is where we have our fields that are actually on change. They're running function 2, which is going to be function 2 is just updating this search field, right? And on change, we just take, you know, we're passing our event up to function 2, which can then look inside of that and it can see, okay, let's try to find our inputs, let's get the values, and let's update that search object. So this case will be more complicated. Search is not just a string, it's an object, because we are searching many things. We are searching on the name of the recipe, we're searching on the type of cuisine, we're searching on the difficulty of cooking it, okay? So let's actually, yeah, let's put here difficulty. I forgot that. And let's just say difficulty is either easy, medium, or hard, and we're just going to make this easy, okay? So that's another thing that we have to think about. Okay, so we have that. And is that it? Is there anything else we need for our state? Or in terms of, are these all the functions we have? Right. So we need to, let's move this down here. Right, we need to think about cooking assist, okay? So we need comment. I think comment can just exist. We need to keep track of the comment the user is typing. So comment can exist at this level. And then, no, I think I need to be able to move that a little bit over. Okay. Here's the thing though. So we need a function to, again, keeping track, yes. But then also, so we have a function that keeps track of what the comment is being typed. That exists. I'm going to make that green because that exists at this level. But, and here's quite important thing. The function that submits a comment is passed down because, again, when you have probably going to have a button in your Cook Assist somewhere that actually has the submit comment function, right? On click, you submit the comment. And so that's something that you pass down because up here, you might want to have functionality where after you submit the comment, so like .then, after you send the request to submit the comment, I think that's like a post, you want to update these recipes so that, and the reason why you update that is so that the recipe that you've selected here is updated, okay? So I think what I will do here is I will pass down another prop, and I will call this let me just think here. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. We want to be able to integrate both of these. So here's the kind of thing. We want this and that. We want these to be communicating in some way, right? Because when we click a recipe, we want to show the ingredients, right? So what we could do is we have an on-click handler that So this recipes, again, is an array. So if we want to isolate any particular recipe, we need the index of that recipe, right? So one thing I'm thinking is that when we click a recipe here, somehow up here, we have a function that on click of this down here, up here, we have a state that reflects a selected recipe. And that state is updated to be the recipe that we have selected. And so that is actually what we passed down here. So here we'll have another state. I'll just call it selected recipe. But let's forget about index and let's just do that. Then here, that's actually going to be the red one. So that's actually what is passed down to our Cook Assist, the selected recipe. And then here I will have another function. I'll have function 9 updates the selected recipe. And since we're updating states all the way up here, we need function 9 to exist up here, if I'm not mistaken. Right, because on click, we will then. So here, I'll put function 9. Now, I probably have missed something somewhere, but that's sort of, in a nutshell, I think what we need. Remember, the recipe card itself, we can have an on-click on the entire card. Okay, here's one thing. So if you have, this is another thing. So before we leave for today, I think this is pretty important. So if you have like so let's say this is a component, right? And let's say this is a button. Okay, let's say this is a div. So this dark gray is a div. This light gray is a button. Okay, so let's just put div, and then here let's put button. Here's something that's really important that we need to cover. So because this might come up in your project, you might have some on-click, some function that on-click. When you click the div, it does something, and you have a different function when you click the button, it does something. Okay. Here's the thing though. Because the button is inside of a div, if you click the button, you want to ensure that only that on click is activated and not the on click of the div that the button exists inside of. Right? Does anybody want me to sort of go over that, or is that clear? Like we have an on click on the div and we have an on click on the button. We have two different functions that run depending on what we click. Okay. If we only want it when we click the button, we want something to happen, like the button on click, but we don't want the div on click to happen. Okay, is that clear for everybody? Right? The issue is that we have on click for both of them, but the button exists inside of the div. So if we click the button, technically we're also clicking the div. So what you can do is there's some code you can write in the event handler for the button. If you do something, I think it's e.stop propagation. And again, this might not be a React, like it might not be an issue in React, but if you're getting some really weird behavior, you can just do this. Kind of like how we have prevent default on this child button on click. If you put this in, that will prevent the event from, basically it'll prevent the event from also triggering on the div itself, okay? The reason why I'm bringing this up is because it's probably going to happen here, because we have delete, we have the rating, and then we also have the clicking the card itself has to do something, right? So that's why I thought I'd mention that. Okay, so does anyone have like any questions at all on anything that I've covered, or and like sort of why I did it this way? Sorry, I did not get to implementation, but this was just for planning more. I think when it comes to the implementation, we can actually talk about that after. I can give a sort of a stepwise thing for that. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about anything covered so far in this lecture? All right. No, sorry. I was not on mute. I was just like just drinking some water. So I can answer questions. Okay. So right. So great question. What's the point of activating the div? So why do we want to do that? Okay. So the reason why what I'm providing here is an example of what we will do on the recipe card. Okay. So when when we click a recipe, we want to show on this cook assist component, we want to show the details of that recipe, like preparation time, as well as probably something where the comments, and have a submission system for comments. So we want to be able to basically send data between these two components. Now, the easiest way we can do this, and again, I mentioned here that we have function 9, which updates the state up in the parent here, selected recipe. And so what this function does, what it really does is it's just going to take this recipe and pass it as an argument in this function. And so the function that's implemented up here will just set the selected recipe to this recipe that we pass, okay? Now, that selected recipe is passed down to this cook assist here, and then that's like sort of how we get to see it. Now, why do we need to activate a div, and why do we need to worry about that? So the reason why is because the recipe card that we have 3 on-click handlers in a recipe card. We have delete, like the option to delete that recipe. We have the option to rate the recipe, so those 5 stars. And now we have the option to click the card itself. Other than those two things, we can click the card itself, which sets the selected recipe, which is what we see in this Cook Assist, okay? Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because let's look at this example here. This is a simpler example where we only have 2 things that are clickable. We have the div that we can click. We also have this button that we can click. Now, the difference, the thing is, this button exists inside of this div. And so here's the issue. If we have 2 on-click handlers that do different things, how do we ensure that if we click the button, it doesn't also register us as clicking the div and running both functions? So that's the issue. And so to ensure that does not happen, in the handler for the button click, we can put e.stop_propagation, event.stop_propagation, whatever this function is, this on-click function. And that'll stop the propagation of the event from the child to the parent component, because that is, there is, I think we can search it up here, event propagation in React, event bubbling and cap. So there is this concept of how events are captured in this way and then they bubble up. So I think when you click that, actually the first thing it looks like what's captured is the div click and then the button click. And so we want to stop the I guess, okay, well, that can look at that later, but essentially this will prevent that from happening. It'll prevent the div from also being sort of that thing, the on-click handler running. If that's an issue, I'm not actually sure if React might handle that on its own, but if you get some weird behavior, and I think the best way to test it would be just to have console logs happening, different console logs on click, and just see, is that happening? And if it's not happening, that's fine. If it is happening, then try the stop propagation and see if that works. Right. So I guess now that we have covered all our concepts, I think one thing I want to talk about is actually how do we go from this to code? Okay, so that's where I would recommend. So step 1, the first thing I would recommend doing is just writing out the skeleton structure for the components themselves. No state, no props, just a skeleton structure. What is importing what? And yeah, just like that. Then what you can do is these functions. So create the functions, name them appropriately using the naming convention, but just have console logs inside that this is what is clicked, and so on and so forth, right? And then, some of these components, you can start getting the fields ready, some basic fields. Some of these functions, you can, again, just console logs and just, comment that this still needs to be to do. I think for troubleshooting purposes in the context of this application, but this could be generalized. One thing I would do, I would try to get real data as fast as possible. So I would use ChatGPT, I would fill the mock API, and I would try to set up the GET request so that on initial load, I have real data to work with. And then what I would do then, the first thing I would do is make sure this display is working. Just so I can see the display, I can see the recipe cards. Now, I don't need any data on the recipe cards. I could just, the only data I can display initially would probably just be the name, and then just have those 2 buttons. And then I would test the functionality. Is delete working? Is the rating working, right? So I would implement enough such that all the core functionality is working without worrying about the details, like displaying all the instructions of the recipe, the image, all of that stuff. I would forget about that and leave that to the end. First, I would just make sure, is core functionality working? Can I do these things? you know, not even worrying about the styling or if I'm displaying all the content, but just are these supported, right? Because this is the core functionality. If I know that all my functions are working and I'm properly updating my data, my endpoints are working, then I'm fine. I'm golden. Then, you know, the CSS and displaying all the content that I want, that's just a matter of an object access. It's quite easy at that point. But the core would just be setting this up first. So first setting it up with stubs. So just nothing happening inside other than probably console logs. Then thinking about what arguments do I need? Do I need the ID? Do I need the recipe? Like what do I need to send in the function? Then trying to get actual data. So just setting up the GET request so that the initial load of recipes gives me my data. And then setting up, you know, in this case, the recipes. So I see that data, the most basic form of it. I just see the, maybe there's just a really basic div with a height and width, and then the buttons are inside and maybe the name of the recipe, right? Just that's it. And then using that to test some of these additional functions, delete, rate, let me think, the selection function, this one, right? So that sort of step-by-step process, you know, starting with just basic functionality and then slowly extending that out. And you can tell, like in that whole process, I'm only doing what is necessary for me to be able to test functionality in the most basic way. I'm not worrying about, am I displaying all my content? Am I capturing all my fields? Am I, yeah, like that sort of, I'm not really worrying about that. I'm just checking, you know, do the endpoints work? Do the functions do what I want? And, you know, is this stop propagation? Is that happening? Right. So I hope that is, I hope that just clarifies, like, that is just how I would approach it. Now, of course, you can do it differently, but I would recommend approaching it in that way to minimize the amount of troubleshooting or the bugs that you might encounter. Because if you get that skeleton set up and you know your endpoints are working, you know that these functions are running, then you're sort of golden. Then all you need to do is CSS and displaying all the data that you want. But as long as those core things are working, then then you know you're all right. And any bugs that you encounter probably do not exist in that specific part of the project. Okay, does anyone have any questions about that? Okay, perfect. All right, so let's go on our break. Okay, so let's go on like a 10-minute break before we start the lab. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload this right away to these slides. I'm going to upload them right away. And in these slides, we have the link. So I put the link to the readings here, and I put the link to this higher order functions video that just clarifies those callbacks like map and filter, which are pretty useful. Okay.